This is an Introduction to English Grammar Part 4, the Classifications of Nouns. This is for a course given at the University of Utah, and my name is Karen. I have some review questions first. If you want to pause the video while you answer the review questions and then go on with it when you're ready, that would be recommended as you prepare for our exams. Okay, the first question is to define mental, descriptive, and prescriptive grammars. These were three grammars that we talked about in earlier presentations. The second question is about the two ways in which prescriptivists created grammar rules. Okay, the first one is to name both ways and give an example of each. You should be able to state the rule, how it was created or justified, and give an example of a sentence that violates it. So a sentence that native English speakers use that breaks the rule. Okay? You don't need to provide the names of the grammarians, just the information about the rule. Another review question has to do with inflectional and derivational affixes in the following sentences. So somehow identify these affixes, as many as you can, and whether or not they are derivational or inflectional. Okay, here's the answers for that. You can see that the red markings are the derivational affixes and the green markings are the inflectional affixes. Again, if you're not sure what those terms mean, you can go back to the slide presentation about those terms. Here's a third review slide, is to identify some constituents in the following sentences. This was what we finished up with last time. So we named some parts of the sentence as we broke them down into phrases. We named them either noun phrases, verb phrases, or prepositional phrases. So take a look at these three sentences and see how you can break up these sentences into different phrases or groups of words and label them if you're able to do that. Okay, again, the answer's on the next slide, so if you want to try it yourself first, pause the video. Okay, so here's the answer. You can see that we have the engaged students goes together, then participate in class discussions, but class discussion seems to be linked a lot closer than participate in class discussions. So we break them down into a noun phrase, a verb phrase, and then a prepositional phrase with a noun phrase underneath it. Okay, and again, we've broken down here noun number 2 and number 3. Okay, let's get to our new information. For this presentation, I want you to be able to know the basic definitions and examples of the following. So here's a list of the vocabulary we'll be using. Noun, proper noun, common noun, abstract noun, concrete noun, animate noun, inanimate noun, count noun, and non-count noun. Two other things that I want you to be aware of is that as we talk about these things, often the terminology that we just use to describe grammars, it was created quite a while ago based on an old way of understanding grammar. And so sometimes it doesn't describe it very well the way we actually use it. Okay? And the second thing is that sometimes even when we have a very strict, ungrammatical identification, it can be mitigated or shown to not be true in the right circumstances. So what happens is we're looking at sentences on a sentence level, but sometimes when things are in discourse and you're given a lot of context, you actually might accept that type of sentence, even though in this sentence level description you may not accept it. First of all, what's a noun? Well, we often heard growing up that a noun is a person, place, or thing. As I got a little bit older, I can remember them adding something like a person, place, thing, or idea. We are going to be looking at the nouns based on how they behave. So linguists take a look at how a noun behaves in a sentence, not just what type of thing it is. Okay, so most of our things are based on behavior. Inflectional markings is one indication that something is a noun, okay, if it can take number and possession. Here are some other criteria for identifying if something is behaving like a noun. We can add derivational suffixes like ness, ation, and udge, like in storage. Okay, often the position of the noun, it's frequently preceded by articles. So here we have a book, the classroom, and umbrella. That gives me an indication that it probably is a noun if it comes after an article or a determiner. Okay, nouns can also be modified by adjectives. And then, of course, how it functions in the sentence. So it might be able to act as a subject or an object. This is a pretty loose explanation of what a noun is, but we'll look at lots of examples through the next several presentations. Here are some common ways to classify nouns: concrete and abstract, common and proper, animate and inanimate, and count nouns and non-count nouns. With your knowledge of English, even if you don't know what these classifications are, you might know what these words mean, and so it may help you identify what type of noun we're talking about. Here are some of the concrete and abstract nouns. Well, concrete nouns describe objects in the real world. Abstract nouns describe things that are intangible, like ideas or concepts. If a noun is concrete, you'll be able to give a positive answer to the following questions. Can you touch it? Can you see it? Even if it's under the microscope, maybe not with your bare eye. If you give a negative answer to these questions, then the noun is abstract, or it's some sort of idea or concept. Here are some examples: table, concrete, house, ambiguity, history, freedom. Okay, which of these things do you identify as being concrete, that you can touch them, or that they are not, or that they are intangible and you're unable to touch? Well, generally we think of ambiguity and freedom as being something that we can't touch. History gets a little bit touchy because you can see it in some ways, but I would also classify it as not as an abstract noun instead of a concrete noun. Let's take a look at proper and common nouns. Proper nouns are names for things. Common nouns are nouns that describe everything else. Here are some examples. General Sherman. Notice the capital S, okay, is a proper noun. The White House. Again, notice the use of the capitals. Broadway, meaning Broadway in New York, where they put on Broadway shows, okay? Not just the name of a street in your downtown city that might be called Broadway, like on the corner of 3rd and Broadway. Although if it's the name of a street, it also would be capitalized as a proper noun. Okay? Street, boy, girl. Those are examples of common nouns where we wouldn't capitalize. According to prescriptive rules, proper nouns are supposed to be capitalized in writing. Can you think of any context where this rule doesn't apply, where you wouldn't capitalize them in writing? Here's an example. The poet E. E. Cummings purposefully wrote his name in lowercase for poetic effect. And the convention for spelling proper nouns has largely fallen out of use in internet contexts, such as email and texting. I can't remember the last time I capitalized something on a text unless my autocorrect did it for me. Let's take a look at inanimate and animate nouns. Okay, animate means living. For English speakers, this basically means the same thing as human. That might be different in some languages where they have distinctions between animate, inanimate, and then they may have some grammatical features specifically for human and non-human. We, in English, have a difference between animate and inanimate. Inanimate means not living. Okay? Why this is important to us is because we use these types of nouns in different ways. Here are some examples. Only animate nouns can use certain verbs. My dog sleeps for hours every day. So something that's living can sleep. The chair sleeps for hours every day. Well, that seems to be ungrammatical because chairs generally can't sleep because they're inanimate. Second, animates and inanimates are used differently in questions. Okay? If we have who made that noise, we're looking for a person. If it's non-human, we say what made that noise. So if I hear something like a wind chime, which is not breathing, not living, then I would use what. What made that noise? Suppose your neighbors come along with their brand new baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. What difficulty might you have, grammatically speaking, finding out the baby's name or age? This happens to me frequently when I'm in a store or something and I might see a baby and I say, oh, what a lovely baby, because I don't know whether I should say he or she. Okay, what about some things in your house? How does your family treat your pet grammatically? Is it human or non-human? What about grammatically between animals in your home and animals at the zoo? So maybe you have a name for the animal in your home. Maybe the animal in your home, you talk about it as being more human characteristics than an animal at the zoo. What about insects? I added at last minute, what about your car? So in my household, we have a name for our car, And when it is running slowly, we try to encourage it by calling its name. So we say, oh, come on, Mo, you can do it. Let's do it, Mo. And we talk to my car as if it's a person. So in some ways, we treat my car as if it's a person instead of an inanimate noun. Count and non-count nouns are something that's very interesting to look at in English. If you're a native speaker of English, you may never have really thought about the differences. The traditional way to define the distinction is that count nouns express something that is discrete, meaning it can be counted, like 1, 2, 3 of something, while non-count nouns express something that cannot be easily counted. Here are some examples. Examples of count nouns include the following. My neighbor has 12 cats. Okay, I can also put a number with something that can be counted. Can you believe how many pencils the secretary had? You'll be sick if you eat all those apples. My brother has an interesting truck. Okay, another indication of countable nouns is that they take a plural. Examples of non-count nouns include the following. I like to eat rice every day. Notice there are no numbers. When John's mother opened his bedroom, she saw cereal everywhere. The kindness of the elderly gentleman touched me. Here are some rules about count and non-count nouns. Count nouns can be measured or counted. They have plurals. They cannot stand alone in the singular. They have to occur with an, or the. Okay, sometimes a number. We talk about the number of a count noun, not the amount. And to ask about count nouns, we use the question word how many. So how many apples do you have? When we talk about non-count nouns, we are not able to measure these or to count these. They don't have plural forms. So the example on the previous screen, rice, we don't have a plural that is something like rices, 1 rice, 2 rices. Okay? They don't have a plural form, and they may not stand alone in the singular. They cannot occur, though, with or an. Or an is an indicator that something just has one. We also talk about the amount of a count noun, not the number. And to ask about count nouns, we use how much. Okay, here's where it gets kind of interesting with count and non-count nouns. Here are some examples. Cat, apple, air. Okay, think to yourself which of those are count and which of those are non-count. Well, I can say 1 apple, 4 apples. 1 cat, 4 cats. 1 air, 4 airs. That doesn't seem to quite work for me. So air is ungrammatical when we add a plural, so it must be a non-count noun. Here are some others. Water, happiness, rice. The prescriptive rules about the behavior of count and non-count nouns do not capture people's actual usage. So here is where it starts to get a little bit interesting, because the distinction for a native English speaker between count and non-count nouns seems to actually be disappearing in some ways, especially when we use quantifiers. First of all, let's look at some nouns that now are used as both plural and singular. So they might be a non-count noun in some aspects, and they might be a count noun in other sentences. So here we have origami is made of paper. This is an example of a non-count form of that noun. The second sentence, I have to turn in 3 papers in my English class. That one's countable. 3 raccoons ate my cat's food last night. Ooh, countable. Davy Crockett's hat is made of raccoon. Non-countable. It seems to work together as a mass noun. During the winter, the ice on the roads is very slippery. Non-count. The planet Pluto is made of many ices, including water ice and methane ice. Often what happens is when we start to talk about types of something, then the plural is acceptable for something that was previously not countable. But over time, when we hear those plurals over and over again, we start to accept them in certain contexts. Here's another example where the distinction's going away. English speakers never use fewer with non-count nouns, but we frequently use less with count nouns. We should use less with non-count nouns and fewer with count nouns, but sometimes it crosses over a little bit. Here's an example. That sign in the grocery store that says this line is for 13 items or less is actually prescriptively grammatically incorrect. It should be this line is for items is for 13 items or fewer, which for many native speakers sounds grammatically incorrect. So here's an instance where our prescriptive grammar and our mental grammar may differ quite a bit. Here's another example, one less password. Password is a countable noun, so it should be one fewer password. Album reviews in 75 words or less should be 75 words or fewer. We also use or have in flux using the words amount or number. So here are some represented here. The amount of water in New Orleans was too much for the number of levees they had. This would be a correct use of both amount for a mass noun like water and number of for levees, something that's countable. However, amount is frequently used for both kinds of nouns. Any amount of books. The amount of security cameras has skyrocketed. When you reach a certain amount of points. Again, all of those things are countable and should be used with a number of. So when expressing quantities, we use many, few, more, fewer for which type of noun. And we're supposed to, by our rules, use much, little, more, and less for the other type of nouns. See if you can fill in those blanks with the correct one. Okay, we should use many, few, more, and fewer for countable nouns, and much, little, more, less for non-count nouns. When expressing quantities, we use, here we go. Okay, here's a summary on these two different types of nouns, just for count and non-count. It's actually a pretty big distinction. Whether a noun is count or non-count has to do with the way it's used, not the meaning. So there's nothing that makes paper inherently count or non-count. It has to do with the way we use it in a sentence, as we saw where I could make it both countable and non-countable. Although prescriptive rules about count and non-count nouns are still there, speakers seem to be collapsing their distinctions between these nouns. In fact, I use a distinction, how much, when I'm asking a question about a non-countable substance, and how many when I'm asking about countable things. But my children growing up have heard so often these used incorrectly that they don't appear to have a distinction, and they use how much for everything. So they might say, how much apples are in the bag, which for me sounds ungrammatical, but it's perfectly acceptable with their mental grammar. In the future, the English language may not preserve this distinction. Because it's in use so often, people are hearing it that way, it actually changes their mental grammar. But the prescriptive rules say that it should still be there. This is an area in which English is changing, and look for more changes of these types even in our lifetimes. The summary of the noun classifications, remember there were many ways we could classify nouns. We have many labels that we use to classify, but in this course we're mostly describing the nouns based on how they behave and not by some arbitrary classification. However, you should know that it's possible to classify nouns by more than one classification. So if I use the noun dog, dog is an animate noun, it's also a countable noun, and it has other properties as well. So we can classify it with more than one classification at the same time.